Saturday morning, February 9th, 2002. The stroke had come the previous afternoon, while Princess Margaret was still at Kensington Palace. By evening, cardiac complications had developed. At 2:30 in the morning, in the absolute dark of a London winter night, a car left Kensington Palace and made the short drive across the city to the King Edward VII Hospital. Inside were Lord Linley, then 40 years old, and his sister, Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones, then 37. They had been called. They went. The Queen was kept fully informed throughout the night. She wasn't in the room. Princess Margaret died at 6:30 in the morning, peacefully, in her sleep. She was 71 years old. Within the hour, Buckingham Palace pinned a black-framed announcement to the gate. It read, "Her beloved sister, Princess Margaret, died peacefully in her sleep this morning at 6:30 in the King Edward VII Hospital." Her children, Lord Linley and Lady Sarah Chatto, were at her side. Sarah's name was in the official record of the moment. She had been there from before 2:30 in the morning, through the hours before dawn, through the shift change of the night staff, through the slow gray arrival of a February morning over London, until the end. Her mother had been declining for 4 years, a mild stroke in February 1998, while on holiday in Mustique, a bathroom accident the following year that scalded her feet so badly she required a wheelchair and a cane from that point forward. Further strokes in 2000 and 2001 that left her partially paralyzed, her vision affected, her last public appearance in December 2001. By her final months, she was largely confined to a wheelchair at Kensington Palace. Her children had watched this long diminishment, not a sudden loss, but a years-long anticipatory one, the kind that doesn't make the final moment easier when it comes, because nothing makes it easier. 6 weeks before Princess Margaret died, the Queen Mother had attended Margaret's funeral, arriving in a car with blacked-out windows, in a wheelchair, refusing to allow the press a photograph of her in that condition. She had insisted on coming to bury her daughter. She was 100 years old. She would be dead herself in 6 weeks. On Saturday the 30th of March, 2002, at 3:15 in the afternoon, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, died peacefully in her sleep at Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park. She was 101 years old. Her surviving daughter, the Queen, was at her bedside. Between Princess Margaret's death and the Queen Mother's death, 49 days. 49 days is just under 7 weeks. It's the time it takes for early spring to make itself felt in England. It's a long time to absorb one death, and nowhere near enough time to absorb 2. Sarah Chatto was 37 years old. She had a husband, Daniel, and 2 small sons named Samuel and Arthur. She had the materials for survival. But in those 49 days, she had lost the only 2 women who had been above her in the family's female line. Mother and grandmother, both in a single winter, without the mercy of spacing. Her brother David was the new Earl of Snowdon. Their father, Anthony Armstrong-Jones, was alive. He would live until 2017. But he had been divorced from Princess Margaret since 1978 and had built a life apart. There was no woman older than Sarah in her family now. She was at the top of the structure, and the structure above her was gone. Except for one person. Her aunt, Queen Elizabeth II, had just buried her only sister and her mother in the same 49 days. At 75, the Queen was without the 2 women who had defined the private architecture of her existence since birth. For decades, she and Margaret had spoken by a direct telephone line linking Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace almost every day. The line maintained specifically for the 2 of them, a piece of infrastructure built for one relationship. The biographer Andrew Morton described the sisters as sharing a love, friendship, and conspiracy that were impressive to behold. A family friend, Reynaldo Herrera, wrote that the only time anyone ever saw the Queen show her emotions in public was at Margaret's funeral. For a few minutes that day, as she stood by the steps of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, watching her sister's coffin being borne away, her eyes betrayed her. The coffin had been borne away. Then, 6 weeks later, the Queen's mother died too. The Queen stood at the bedside of her mother at Royal Lodge on the 30th of March and watched that happen also. What was left? A queen aged 75 who had lost the only sibling she had ever had, and the mother who had been the fixed point of her private life. A niece aged 37 who had lost the mother who raised her, and the grandmother who had held the matriarchal position of the family since before either woman was born. They were the only two people in the world who held both losses simultaneously, from the same two relationships, at the same depth. Princess Margaret's death occurred in the year of the Queen's Golden Jubilee, the 50th anniversary of her accession, 1952 to 2002, 50 years on the throne, and the year began with her sister dying 3 days after the anniversary of her father's death. The Jubilee concerts and celebrations in June of that year went ahead, as they had to. But the year had begun in a hospital waiting room at 6:30 in the morning, with Sarah Chatto sitting at a bedside. Every account of Lady Sarah Chatto calls her the Queen's favorite niece. That framing is affectionate and structurally wrong. The Queen had one sibling, Princess Margaret. Margaret had 2 children, David and Lady Sarah. David is a nephew. Sarah is a niece. That exhausts the category. Lady Helen Windsor, the daughter of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, is sometimes loosely grouped with the Queen's extended family, but she is the daughter of the Queen's first cousin, making her a first cousin once removed, not a niece. Lady Margarita Armstrong-Jones, David's daughter, was born on the 14th of May 2002, 5 weeks after the Queen Mother died, arriving into a world where both her grandmother and great-grandmother were already gone. There was no field. Sarah was the entire field. The favorite niece framing implies a preference exercised among options. The actual situation is simpler and more structural. Queen Elizabeth II had exactly one blood niece in the world, and after the 9th of February 2002, that woman was the only person alive who shared the same compound grief, from the same 2 relationships at the same specific weight. Tatler has stated plainly that Sarah is the only daughter of Princess Margaret and the only niece of Queen Elizabeth II. Wikipedia's own article on Lady Sarah acknowledges it in a single phrase, the Queen's only niece, naming the structural uniqueness as the explanation for the closeness, in the same breath. The Queen had known this about Sarah her entire life. She had been in the room at Sarah's christening, in the private chapel at Buckingham Palace on the 13th of July, 1964, when Margaret's daughter was 43 days old. She had attended Sarah's wedding in July 1994, along with Prince Philip, the Queen Mother, and Diana. She had been the aunt for 37 years before the spring of 2002 made the relationship something different. Before the losses, Sarah Armstrong-Jones was the quietest member of her generation of the royal family by a very wide margin. She was born on the 1st of May 1964 at Kensington Palace, the second child and only daughter of Princess Margaret and Anthony Armstrong-Jones, 1st Earl of Snowdon. At birth, she was 7th in line to the British throne, royal enough for the formality, distant enough from the immediate succession to make a different kind of life possible. Her parents were one of the most photographed couples in 1960s Britain, the princess and the Bohemian Society photographer, a partnership that attracted constant attention. Their daughter observed this from close range and chose a different direction from the beginning. She and her brother David grew up in the nursery at Kensington Palace, in apartment 10, raised with a nanny called Verona Sumner, and a father who was, unusually for the era, hands-on enough to teach them to build things and think about design and aesthetics. Lord Snowdon was a maker by instinct, and the instinct transferred. David became a furniture designer. Sarah became a painter. Their parents' separation came formally in 1976, when Sarah was 12. The divorce followed in 1978, when she was 14. School holidays went to the royal estates, Sandringham, Balmoral, where the family gathered and Sarah spent time outdoors with a sketchbook, painting the landscapes. She was training her eye on the hills of Scotland before she had any formal instruction. The Wikipedia article on Lady Sarah notes specifically that she did landscape painting at the royal estates in childhood. That connection, the royal landscape, the painter's practice, the specific terrain of Balmoral, would run through the next 50 years of her life without interruption. She attended Biddale School in Hampshire, a deliberately progressive, nonconformist boarding school founded in 1893, known in royal circles as an unconventional choice. She left with a single A-level in art, then Camberwell School of Art from 1982 to 1985. Then the Royal Academy Schools from 1985 to 1989, one of the oldest fine art academies in Britain, where she won the Winsor and Newton Prize in 1988 and the Creswick Landscape Prize in 1990. In the mid-1980s, she spent 2 years in India with her father, while he worked as production photographer on David Lean's film A Passage to India, produced by John Knatchbull, the 7th Baron Brabourne. She worked as an intern in the costume department, studied wood gilding under her father's cousin Thomas Messel, and absorbed what the Indian light and landscape does to a painter's eye. On another British film set in India, the 1983 production of Heat and Dust, she first encountered Daniel Chatto, an actor and artist from a theatrical family. His father, Tom, was an actor. His mother, Ross, was a well-known theatrical agent. They were colleagues in that world before they were anything else, and they wouldn't appear together publicly until 3 years after they met, at gallery openings in London in 1986. The wedding was on the 14th of July, 1994, at St. Stephen Walbrook in the City of London, a church designed by Sir Christopher Wren, and the first time the venue had ever been used for a royal wedding. 200 guests attended, compared to the 2,000 who had filled Westminster Abbey for David's wedding to Serena Stanhope the previous year. The ceremony lasted 30 minutes. Sarah wore a gown by Jasper Conran, ivory georgette over a corseted bodice, its square neckline drawn from a Holbein portrait, which is the choice of a painter thinking about form. The Snowdon floral tiara sat in her hair, 3 diamond brooches her father had given her mother on their own wedding day in 1960, assembled into a headpiece for the first time in public. After the ceremony, the party moved to Clarence House, the Queen Mother's residence, for the reception. For the honeymoon, the couple returned to India, the country where they had met. The Queen attended the wedding. Prince Philip attended. The Queen Mother attended. Diana, Princess of Wales, attended, making it the first event at which Charles and Diana appeared together since his admission of his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles in a television interview broadcast the month before. The whole complicated machinery of the royal family came to watch Sarah marry quietly, in a short ceremony, and then go home to Surrey. Samuel Chatto was born in 1996. Arthur Chatto was born in 1999. In 1995, Sarah Armstrong-Jones began exhibiting her paintings at the Red Fern Gallery in Mayfair, working under her maiden name, the painter's name, kept separate from the family's name by choice. She remained at the Red Fern consistently for the 3 decades that followed. In 2004, 2 years after her mother's death, she became vice president of the Royal Ballet, the institution of which Princess Margaret had been the first president since 1957. The role passed from mother to daughter, quietly and without ceremony, a generation later. In 2024, she became its president. The gallery curator, Patrick Kinmonth, later described her paintings as a profound contemplation of the world she seeks to know and the method she has mastered. He might as easily have been describing how she managed everything else. Through all of this, the schools, the exhibitions, the marriage, the children, the institutional role, she maintained a profile so low that most Britons barely knew she existed. No tabloid controversies, no published interviews, no public commentary on anything. She appeared at the jubilees, the family funerals, the Christmases, the weddings, and then she went home and painted. Arthur later served with the Royal Marines. Samuel studied history of art at the University of Edinburgh and became a sculptor based in West Sussex. Their mother continued to paint. She was, by every documented account, the quietest member of her generation. That wasn't accidental. It was a sustained decision, held across decades. The spring of 2002 changed the family's architecture in ways the press reported and in ways the press didn't. What the press reported: 2 deaths in 49 days, 2 funerals, a queen who managed her grief with the composure she brought to everything public. Prince Charles spoke on television in the days after Princess Margaret's death. "This is a terribly sad day for all my family, but particularly, of course, for the Queen, my mama, and my grandmother, the Queen Mother, and also for Princess Margaret's children, David and Sarah." He named them specifically. He named what they had lost. On the 9th of April 2002, the Queen Mother's funeral was held at Westminster Abbey. The tenor bell rang 101 times, once for each year of her life. 1,700 military personnel lined the route. Inside the Abbey, Lady Sarah and Daniel Chatto walked together down the center aisle to their seats in the lantern, recorded in the official funeral account as part of the family procession. Later that same day, at Windsor, something quieter happened. The ashes of Princess Margaret, who had died 8 weeks earlier, whose own private funeral had been held on the 15th of February, were interred alongside the Queen Mother's coffin in the King George VI Memorial Chapel at St. George's Chapel. Mother and daughter, complicated with each other in life, placed together in the end. Sarah had stood at the margin of both services that day, as she had stood at her mother's bedside in the February dark. What the press didn't report in any sustained way. What happened in the weeks and months that followed, in the spaces that leave no formal record. The court circular documents official royal engagements. As a non-working royal, Lady Sarah had barely appeared in it before the spring of 2002, and would barely appear in it afterward. Private teas, private invitations, private weekends at Sandringham. These aren't the kind of contact that leaves official documentation. They leave only the pattern they build across years, observed and confirmed by biographers and household staff, and the people present. Robert Hardman's 2022 biography, Queen of Our Times, describes the Queen rebuilding her private family relationships in the aftermath of the spring deaths, drawing people closer, finding new rhythms for the relationships that had always been there, but had been rearranged by loss. Giles Brandreth's Elizabeth, an intimate portrait, published the same year, and drawing on Brandreth's years of close royal access, points toward the same period as the one in which the Queen's relationship with her niece deepened materially. Neither book provides the granular specificity of a diary entry. The exact counts and dates of private meetings in those first months aren't in the verifiable public record. What both establish, confirmed by the observable pattern that followed, is a relationship that changed in character after April 2002. Angela Kelly, who served as the Queen's senior dresser from 1993 until the Queen's death in 2022, wrote in her 2019 memoir, The Other Side of the Coin, about the Queen's practice of maintaining personal handwritten correspondence with family members well into old age. The Queen wrote by hand by choice, not convention. It was how she stayed present in the lives of people she couldn't reach by phone or visit. That correspondence was a sustained act of attention. The sovereign, who had a famously regimented schedule and a famously controlled public face, expressed herself in private through the pen. What the 2 decades look like in specific evidence. In 2004, Sarah became vice president of the Royal Ballet, her mother's institution, continued by her daughter without ceremony. In 2009, Sarah's younger son Arthur was appointed a Page of Honor to Queen Elizabeth II, a role he held until 2015 when he turned 16. For 6 years, the teenage son of the Queen's niece served formally in the Queen's household at major ceremonies. He stood in rooms where the institution and the family were indistinguishable, near a woman who had known his grandmother as a sister. It isn't a small thing to place a child in that proximity. It's an act of inclusion, sustained across 6 years of growing up. In December 2015, Sarah opened a solo exhibition at the Red Fern Gallery, Recent Paintings and Drawings, that ran through April 2016. 3/4 of the work sold. Tatler's coverage of her art career across this period documents the consistency of it. Expressive landscapes, natural forms in rich, earthy colors. The work of someone who had been looking at the same terrain for 50 years and finding new ways to see it. The Queen's relationship to her niece's painting career wasn't publicly documented in the way that institutional patronage would be, but it was consistent, maintained across 20 years of what were, in the end, the same hills: Balmoral, Sandringham, Surrey, rendered differently by each season and each decade of looking. Arthur Chatto's service with the Royal Marines was confirmed as of June 2022, when Tatler photographed him at the Platinum Jubilee Thanksgiving service. Samuel's work as a sculptor in West Sussex was confirmed across the same period. 2 young men who had grown up between their mother's painting career and their great-aunt's court, shaped by both and claimed by neither in any formal way. On the 3rd of September 2023, the first anniversary of the Queen's death, King Charles III and Queen Camilla attended the service at Crathy Kirk near Balmoral Castle. The Royal Watcher documented the full attendance. The King and Queen were joined by the 2nd Earl of Snowdon and by Lady Sarah Chatto, along with Daniel Chatto, Arthur Chatto, and Samuel Chatto, all of them together at Balmoral on the anniversary in the landscape the Queen had loved. That is what 20 years of relationship building looks like when it ends. The whole family at the right place on the right day, still present. Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle on the 8th of September 2022 at the age of 96. Her son Charles and her daughter Anne were at the bedside. Sarah wasn't among those present at the final moment, but she had made her visit to Balmoral in the weeks before, as King Charles III's book, My Mother and I, confirms, part of the annual rhythm that had characterized the relationship across the whole period. The Queen died in the place she had used all her life, the same hills, the same house, the same landscape Sarah had been painting since she was a girl at the royal estates with a sketchbook. 11 days later, on the 19th of September 2022, the state funeral was held at Westminster Abbey. Sarah Chatto was there. The footage of her face that day, broadcast across news networks and recorded in the press photography of the occasion, showed something the surrounding royal family, for all their grief, didn't quite show in the same register. A loss that was layered, old and recent simultaneously. The senior royals in the direct line had lost a mother. That is, its own particular, irreplaceable weight. But Sarah had lost the woman who had stepped into the space left by a mother who died 20 years earlier. The Queen had been her aunt for 37 years before that spring. After the 9th of February 2002, she had been something more precise. The last person alive who knew Princess Margaret from the inside, who carried the specific private knowledge of what that woman had been like in rooms no camera ever entered. Every private memory Sarah held of her mother had a corresponding memory held by one other person. When the Queen died, the other half of those memories went with her. The grief visible at the funeral wasn't a stranger's grief or a subject's grief. It was close, and it was old, and it was doubled in a way that only one other person's grief at that funeral could have been doubled. And that person was in the front row, carrying the obligations of a direct heir. 6 months later, in May 2023, King Charles III was crowned at Westminster Abbey. Lady Sarah Chatto was there, seated with the extended Windsor family, the non-working royals, the cousins, the people whose relationship to the crown is personal rather than institutional. The Coronation Wikipedia article cites Tatler's Camilla-Tominey in direct connection with Sarah's attendance, her name appearing specifically in the record of that day as a notable presence among the extended family. Court correspondents observed and reported her there. Whether Charles directed her placement personally, or whether the household simply understood what the previous 20 years had established, the outcome is identical. She was in Westminster Abbey as family, not filling a prescribed ceremonial role, as the woman who had been, by the previous monarch's quiet and sustained choice, the closest non-direct line female relative of the crown. In putting her in that abbey, Charles translated something private into something visible. His mother had spent 20 years building this relationship in rooms without cameras, private teas, handwritten letters, Balmoral summers, Sandringham Christmases, the continued presence of a woman who understood what the Queen had lost because she had lost the same things from the same two relationships. He honored it by placing Sarah Chatto in a room with every camera in the country pointed at it. Lady Sarah Chatto is 62 years old. She still paints. She still exhibits at the Redfern Gallery under the name Sarah Armstrong-Jones, the painter's name, not the royal one. Her son Samuel, 29, works as a sculptor in West Sussex. Her son Arthur, 26, served with the Royal Marines. She still lives with Daniel Chatto. She continues to appear at the events that matter: the Easter service at St. George's Chapel, the family gatherings at Buckingham Palace, the commemorative occasions that mark Queen Elizabeth II's legacy as it passes into the long historical record. Tatler's characterization of her across many years of coverage holds. She arrives without fanfare, does what the occasion requires, and leaves. That has been the description since 1994. It hasn't changed. By every documented account, she is exactly the woman she has always been: unhurried, precise, private, without being remote. The one who stayed where she was planted, who inherited her mother's institutional position at the Royal Ballet 2 years after her mother died, without making anything of it. Who raised 2 sons, painted the landscapes, showed up at the family occasions that required showing up. Who sat at a hospital bedside in the February dark of 2002, and then stood at a state funeral 20 years later, still standing, still composed on the surface, still holding whatever she holds inside. Here is the piece the public has been getting slightly wrong for 20 years. This isn't the story of a favorite. Favorites are chosen from among options. The Queen had no options. She had one sibling, and that sibling had one daughter. The Queen had raised 4 sons. She had no daughter of her own. She had the instinct for it, for the specific shape of a mother's attention, and when she looked at Sarah in the spring of 2002, she saw exactly what had been lost, because she had lost the same things from the other side. She had known Margaret as a sister for 52 years. She understood what Margaret's absence would mean for a daughter who had spent 37 years being that daughter. She didn't announce it. She didn't give interviews about her intentions or issue statements about what she meant to do. She made room. In the private calendar, in the houses, in the handwritten letters, across 20 years of Christmases at Sandringham and summers at Balmoral, and the quiet continuation of a relationship that was visible to everyone in the household and largely invisible to the press. The Queen Mother lived to 101. Princess Margaret died at 71. Queen Elizabeth II lived to 96 and outlived her sister by 20 years and 7 months. She used that time. She used it to make sure that the daughter her sister had left behind was never quite as alone as she had been in those 49 days of February and March 2002. On the 19th of September 2022, Sarah Chatto stood at Westminster Abbey and mourned 2 women at once, the one who had just died and the one who had died 20 years before. 2 losses, 1 face, 1 funeral. The audience watching understood what they were seeing, even if no one had named it precisely. Not the grief of a niece for an aunt, but the grief of a daughter for a second mother. The Queen had seen it coming 20 years earlier. She had spent the intervening time making it real. Subscribe for more stories like this.